There are lots of biographies you can read about different people who try to figure out what life is all about, and often spoken of the difficulty they have figuring that out and the emptiness they have. Bob Geldof is one example. His biography is called "Is That It?" And he says that the reason he chose that is because just at the end of Live Aid, after they raised whatever it was, £50 million for Ethiopia, he heard somebody in the crowd shout out, "Is that it?" And he says basically that phrase haunted him, and when asked if he's fulfilled as a human being, he laughs and says, "Not at all. I'm unfulfilled as a human being. Otherwise, why are there these large holes here? Everything I do is because I'm frightened of being bored, because I know that's what's down in those holes. I'm frightened of it, and it makes me very depressed, so I stay active, frenetically so, unfortunately. And that freneticism keeps me going all the time and allows me to think I'm not wasting time." Very honest. Kenneth Williams, famously from the Carry On films and Will-o'-the-Wisp and other things, he wrote in his diary, "I wonder if anyone will ever know the emptiness of my life." Perhaps didn't realise his diaries were going to be published at the time, but Barry Humphries is another one who created and performed as Dame Edna Everage. He wrote his autobiography and called it "More, Please." And this quote that sums up so much of what Ecclesiastes, the book we've been looking at, grapples with as well. He says, "I always wanted more. I never had enough milk or money or socks or sex or holidays or first editions or solitude or gramophone records or free meals or real friends or guiltless pleasure or neckties or applause or unquestioning love. Of course, I've had more than my fair share of most of these commodities, but they always left me with a vague feeling of unfulfillment. Where was the rest?" And what they express is a very real thing, isn't it? What does it look like to live in this world? Ecclesiastes describes life as being like vapour, like just a passing breeze. It's here and then it's gone in a moment, like a breath. And it bothers him. So he's trying to figure out constantly, how do we live wisely in this kind of a world, this world that God has made? In chapter 7 and 8 of Ecclesiastes, we find that we should learn to reflect, not simply react. Verse 1 to 14 of chapter 7, he talks about people preferring a funeral to a party, and that perhaps might seem a strange recommendation, that we should prefer the house of mourning to the house of feasting. But what he's trying to say is, not to be morbid, but what he's trying to say is be a person of depth. There is a reflection that goes on after a funeral, isn't there? And I think we all know that happens in a way that doesn't happen if we're just constantly in the situation where we're having fun. And he talks about various kinds of reactions that you can have as a way of just sort of dealing with life. Laughter, extortion, impatience, anger, nostalgia. He says all these things are unwise. We need to be people who reflect, not react, who think about the realities of the situation. It's a little bit like the story of the lady who was on the Titanic. And when she realised it was going down, she was a very rich lady, like many of the people, and she had many jewels, she had lots of diamonds and stuff like that. And as the boat started to go down, she ran back to her cabin and she grabbed, not her jewellery or anything like that, she grabbed a bag of oranges. Because in that moment, excuse my phone, in that moment, what was really important, what was most significant, was very different to perhaps what she might have thought in a more frivolous kind of situation. Be people who learn to reflect and not just react. Second, we thought we have to learn to live with humility, not pride. In verse 15 to 22, he talks about slightly odd verses. Don't be too wise, don't be too wicked, don't be too righteous, don't be too evil. What does that mean? It's a strange thing. But I think what he's saying is that we shouldn't be pompous or flippant about right living. We should have that right kind of humility. A little bit like when Jesus talks in the New Testament about having a log in your own eye and trying to pick out a speck in somebody else's. Try and recognise the reality and have a bit of humility as you're living your life. And then two more things quickly, because we've talked about them other weeks. Learning to recognise authority and not fight it at the beginning of chapter 8, verse 2 to 8. course, no government is perfect, but in the normal order of things, authority is there to be lived under and respected. And learn to trust God on issues of injustice, verse 9 to 15 of chapter 8. Because, as we thought in a previous week, injustice is painful and it's a real issue. We know it's there in our world, but actually, ultimately, we must just do what we can, but trust God with those issues. So learn to reflect, not react. Learn to live with humility, not pride. Learn to recognize authority and not fight it. And learn to trust God on issues of injustice. But still, as we look in these verses, there's two big problems that still come. Because he says, firstly, we cannot live wisely and we cannot fully understand. So, turn the phone off. So we have the reality that we can't fully live wisely, chapter 7, verse 23 to the beginning of chapter 8. And then right at the end in chapter 8, verse 16 and 17, we cannot fully understand. What do we do with that? What do we do with those realities? We've got lots of yes buts in our lives, haven't we? On all these things we've talked about. The reason is that we are ultimately created, limited people. And there's a sense in which we should learn to love our limitations. Embrace them. It's part of recognizing that God is God and we are not. That's a big part of it. And to understand that we cannot live perfectly, wisely and with full understanding. Jesus did. And 1 Corinthians talks about Jesus Christ as our wisdom, which is interesting. But we need to learn to recognize our limitations, to recognize that we are not the ones who can understand it all and live it all. And when we do that, there's a real sense in which we are then freed up to live with life as a gift, enjoy its highs, trust patiently through its lows, and recognize that we can't control it all or understand it all, but we can trust. And so verse 15 says, have fun, eat, drink, work hard, enjoy happiness that God gives you in this world. It's similar to the words that we thought about earlier in the year from Micah, once again, to walk humbly with our God. That's what we need to do. So let's seek to do that in our lives.